Welcome to Taste China Learn English, and welcome to today's deep dive. If you grabbed a steamed bun on your way to work this morning, you probably just thought of it as this highly convenient, incredibly fluffy breakfast, right?
Yeah, just a quick bite on the go.
Exactly. But what if I told you that you were actually eating a 2,000-year-old military deception?
Wow.
Like something that was originally designed to replace a human blood sacrifice.
It really completely reframes that quick bite on the subway, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because we look at this smooth, warm, comforting street food, and we just entirely miss the rather dark, brilliant tactical history that's engineered into its very shape.
So today we are taking a deep dive into the fascinating, intricate, and surprisingly high-stakes world of Baozi. That's the Chinese steamed bun.
Right.
We've got a fantastic stack of source material today, and our mission is to unpack the entire spectrum of this culinary cornerstone.
And we are really going to break it down simply, too.
Yeah, we're going to examine the actual science that makes its texture so unique, map out the mechanics behind its versatile flavor profiles, and eventually trace it all the way back to a violent, churning river where a mythical military strategist had to outsmart the gods.
It's quite a journey. And doing that requires us to look past the surface.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't just treat the Baozi as a generic snack.
No, absolutely not.
We need to look at the physics of the dough, how the fats render inside the steamer, and just the sheer ingenuity of how it's physically built.
Okay, let's unpack this because before we can truly appreciate the cultural and historical impact of Baozi, we need to draw a hard line in the culinary sand.
We do.
For anyone just getting familiar with the cuisine, it's really common to look at a Baozi and just categorize it as like a giant dumpling.
Oh, yeah, I see why people make that visual leap for sure.
Right.
But lumping all stuffed, steamed Asian foods into one massive dumpling category really obscures the distinct culinary mechanics at play.
So how do we separate them?
Well, to understand the true anatomy of a baozi, you have to contrast it directly with the jiaozi. That's the traditional Chinese dumpling.
Okay.
And the dividing line between the two is entirely structural. It all comes down to the dough wrapper.
Because jiaozi dough, the dumpling dough, is unleavened, right? So you get that tight, dense, almost chewy wrapper that acts essentially as a restrictive skin.
Exactly. It doesn't expand.
But with Baozi, we introduce yeast into a high moisture steaming environment, which completely changes the structural physics of the bite.
It transforms it entirely.
Is eating a dumpling essentially like eating a delicate piece of stuffed pasta, whereas a Baozi is much more like eating a stuffed cloud of warm bread?
I mean, calling it a cloud of bread is a good starting point, but it actually misses what the scheme specifically does to the yeast.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, think about when you bake traditional bread in an oven. The dry heat rapidly dehydrates the exterior.
Right, you get a crust.
Exactly. It locks the crust in place, which physically restricts how much the dough inside can rise. But inside a bamboo steamer, you have a constant 100% humidity environment.
So it's totally wet heat.
Yeah, the moisture prevents any crust from forming at all. So the yeast can just keep expanding and expanding, creating these infinitely tiny, unrestricted air pockets.
Wow.
That's why the Baozi achieves that pure, white, hyper-porous, almost impossible fluffiness that you just cannot get in a dry oven.
So the lack of a crust is actually a structural feature, not just a byproduct of the steamer.
Precisely.
It allows the dough to act less like standard bread and more like a highly engineered culinary sponge.
That's a great way to put it.
And because of that leavened, expansive architecture, the physical footprint changes dramatically. Like, dumplings are designed for delicate volume. You eat a jiaozi in a single bite.
Right. Maybe polishing off a plate of 20 for a whole meal.
Exactly. But a traditional baozi is a singular, substantial event. We are talking about something the size of your fist.
It really demands a completely different physical interaction. It's a hearty, handheld item that requires multiple bites. It basically acts as a fully self-contained meal.
Yeah, the structure dictates how you consume it.
So structurally speaking, the unleavened, thin, tight wrapper gives you the dumpling, and the leavened, highly expanded, thick wrapper gives you the Baozi.
But here's where it gets really interesting because culinary traditions always feature that one brilliant outlier that completely defies the established taxonomy.
Oh, you mean the exception to the rule?
Yes, in this case, it's the xiaolongbao.
Ah, the Xiaolongbao is such a fascinating contradiction.
Mm.
I mean, if we strictly apply our structural rules, it is a dumpling.
Right, because the wrapper is unleavened.
Exactly. The wrapper is incredibly thin, completely unleavened, and it doesn't rise whatsoever. It is also quite small, designed for a single bite.
And yet, bar, which means bun, is right there in the name.
It is.
So, how does an unleavened, bite sized dumpling earn the prestigious title of a bun?
It all comes down to the architectural folding. A standard Baozi dumpling is typically folded in half, like a half moon, and simply crimped along the edge.
Like a pierogi or a ravioli.
Yeah, very similar. But the Xiaolongbao utilizes the visual language of the Baozi. It's pleated in this complex circular pattern, gathering all that delicate dough at the very top into a tiny, intricate knot.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right. That gathered circular crown is the universal signature of a steamed bun. So technically, by the laws of dough physics, they are soup dumplings. But visually and culturally, they are treated as miniature buns.
They really are tiny, edible pieces of art. But I feel like if we are going to discuss the Xiaolongbao, we owe you, the listener, a very critical warning.
Definitely.
If you have never encountered one of these before, you cannot just approach it like a normal piece of food.
No, it requires a distinct operational strategy. Otherwise, you are in for a very painful experience.
Because that intricate little knot isn't just holding in a meatball. The interior is filled with a rich, savory broth that literally reaches boiling temperatures inside the steamer.
It is basically molten lava when it comes out.
Seriously, if you pop a fresh xiaolongbao directly into your mouth and bite down, the wrapper bursts and you get a localized explosion of scalding hot soup.
You will absolutely burn the roof of your mouth and just ruin your afternoon.
You really have to lift it gently onto a soup spoon, bite a tiny structural hole near the top to let the pressurized steam vent out, deliberately slurp the broth, and only then do you eat the dumpling itself.
It is a ritual of thermal management, really.
It is.
But if we pivot back to our primary subject, the large, fluffy, fist-sized Baozi, we have to look at how that specific dough structure dictates the interior contents. Because the plain leavened dough is essentially a neutral delivery mechanism.
And that neutral canvas is exactly what makes the Baozi the ultimate convenient food. You don't need a plate or utensils. You can literally eat a complete nutritionally balanced meal with one hand while walking down a busy street.
Exactly. It's ancient fast food in the best way.
But the mechanics of the fillings are what I find fascinating. Because usually in Western culinary traditions, a dough is highly specialized. A savory sourdough loaf doesn't suddenly become a delicate dessert pastry just by changing what you spread on it.
Right. The dough itself has to change.
So, how does the Baozi seamlessly transition from a heavy, savory main course to a highly refined dessert without altering the exterior dough wrapper?
Well, the transition works specifically because of that sponge-like cellular structure we talked about earlier. The leavened Baozi dough is just slightly sweet, acting as a textural amplifier rather than a dominant flavor.
Okay, that makes sense.
When you introduce a savory filling, like the classic pork and cabbage, the physics of the steamer take over. As the interior temperature rises, the fat from the pork begins to render and melt.
Oh, and it gets trapped in the bun.
Better than trapped,
Yeah.
because the dough is highly porous. That liquefied savory fat uses capillary action to soak directly into the inner layer of the bread.
Wow.
And at the same time, the cabbage releases its moisture, which creates an internal steam environment softening the crumb even further while retaining just a slight structural crunch.
So the bread literally absorbs the meal from the inside out.
Exactly.
You aren't just eating meat surrounded by bread, you are eating bread that has been infused with the rendered essence of the meat.
Precisely the opposite of a dry sandwich.
Yeah.
And that same mechanical principle applies to other savory profiles too. Like if you use a rich, earthy mushroom filling, the umami heavy moisture penetrates the dough. If you use a spicy tofu filling, the firm density of the tofu provides a striking textural contrast to the pillowy bread surrounding it. It's entirely self-contained engineering.
Okay, so that interior absorption handles the savory side perfectly. But what happens mechanically when we shift to the sweet side? Because, I mean, dessert fillings aren't usually rendering animal fats into the dough.
Right, no rendered fat there. With the sweet applications, the dynamic shifts from absorption to stark textural contrast. Take the iconic red bean paste bun, for example. The adzuki beans have to be boiled down, heavily sweetened, and then meticulously pureed until the paste is exceptionally dense and smooth.
Now, I have to point out that sweetening a bean is a major mental leap for a lot of people.
It really is.
Like, if you grew up in a culture where beans are strictly savory, you put them in chili, you bake them with bacon, you put them in stews, the idea of a bean paste acting as a delicate dessert filling can sound counterintuitive.
It does require leaving your preconceived notions at the door, for sure. But when you look at the mechanics of the red bean paste, it makes perfect sense.
How so?
Well, because the Baozi is steamed, there is no Maillard reaction on the crust.
Yeah.
None of those caramelized roasted flavors you get from a big pastry.
Right, it's just pure white neutral dough.
Exactly. So the flavor burden rests entirely on the filling. That deeply sweetened, earthy red bean paste provides a heavy, velvety anchor that perfectly counterbalances the airy, almost weightless texture of the steamed dough.
Ah, so it coats the palate while the bread cleanses it? So you have the savory camp rendering fats into the dough, and the sweet camp relying on dense textural contrast. But the sources point out that these two cams aren't mutually exclusive. There is a specific bun where these culinary philosophies violently collide.
And when they do, you get arguably the most famous and globally recognized steamed bun in existence, the cha siu bao, or the BBQ pork bun, originating from Guangdong province.
Oh, the chassis bao operates on a totally different visual and mechanical level. I mean, a standard Baozi is sealed, smooth, and pristine on top. But the chassis bao is actively designed to fracture.
It is.
The dough literally splits and bursts open during the steaming process, blooming like a cracked flower.
And that bursting effect isn't an accident. It is a highly controlled chemical reaction.
Really? How do they do it?
Well, historically, bakers used a specific low-gluten flour mixed with leavening agents like ammonium bicarbonate, basically traditional baking chemicals.
Okay.
When that specific dough hits the intense, sudden heat of the bamboo steamer, the rapid expansion of the gases forces the top of the bun to violently split open.
That's wild.
Yeah, and it creates this stunning visual contrast.
Yeah.
You get the brilliant, snowy white dough fracturing to reveal the dark, glossy, mahogany-colored filling inside.
And that filling is the ultimate combination of the flavor profiles we just discussed. It's diced, roasted pork suspended in this incredibly thick, viscous, sweet, and savory glaze.
The chasu bao is the premier ambassador for the sweet and savory flavor profile. You get the soft, neutral yield of the dough, the intense, salty umami of the roasted pork and soy sauce, completely enveloped in the rich, almost caramelized sweetness of the barbecue glaze.
It really hits all the notes.
It hits multiple receptors on the palate simultaneously, which is exactly why it has transcended regional Chinese cuisine to become a mandatory staple in dim sum restaurants worldwide.
It is a masterpiece of food engineering. But as much as I love dissecting the rendering fats and bursting dough of modern dim sum, that bursting visual, that substantial, meaty, fractured object, is actually the perfect bridge to understanding why the Baozi exists in the first place. Because the origin of this food doesn't start in a bustling, fragrant kitchen. It starts in a state of sheer, desperate terror on the banks of a violent river.
This is where the narrative shifts from culinary thermodynamics to ancient battlefield survival.
So, what does this all mean? How does a convenient, highly engineered street food trace its DNA back to an ancient myth?
Well, to understand the origin, we have to look at the legendary military strategist Zhuge Liang.
Mm-hmm.
He's an almost mythical figure in Chinese history, renowned for his tactical brilliance and intellect.
Okay. Setting the scene.
Right. According to the legend, Zhuge Liang was leading his army on a grueling campaign when their path was suddenly blocked by a massive, churning, impossibly dangerous river.
And just to set the scale for you listening, moving an ancient army is a logistical nightmare on a sunny, calm day. You have thousands of men, heavy armor, weapons, livestock, and supplies.
And the conditions they faced were apocalyptic. The legend describes howling, violent winds whipping the river into a frenzy. The waters were completely unnavigable,
So they were stuck.
completely paralyzed, trapped on the banks with no way to push forward and no way to retreat.
Sitting ducks, basically. How do they break the stalemate?
Zhuge Liang sought out the local inhabitants who lived along the riverbanks, desperate for a way to navigate the storm. The locals explained that the chaotic weather wasn't a natural phenomenon, it was the fury of the local river gods.
Ah, of course.
The churning waters were essentially a divine blockade, and according to the strict local traditions, there was only one specific way to appease these gods and secure safe passage.
And I'm going to assume the gods weren't asking for, a toll tax or a polite prayer.
Not at all. The river gods demanded a heavy toll of human blood.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The locals explicitly told Zhuge Liang that to calm the winds, he had to sever the heads of 50 of his own men and hurl those human heads into the roaring river. Only the physical sacrifice of 50 lives would satisfy the gods.
That is an incredibly dark psychological bind for a leader. Your duty is to protect your army and complete the campaign, but the local intelligence tells you that the only way to save the majority is to systematically execute 50 of your own soldiers.
It highlights a fascinating moral tension in these ancient epics. Because Zhuge Liang's reputation wasn't just built on ruthless efficiency, it was built on a foundation of principled leadership.
Right.
He fundamentally refused to murder his own men, nor would he slaughter any innocent locals to fulfill a bloody superstition. He categorically rejected the loss of human life.
But the reality of the howling wind and the trapped army remained. He had to cross that river.
Exactly.
Wait, so he refuses to provide the actual blood sacrifice, but he still needs to convince an angry river god that he paid the toll. You can't just throw an empty dough ball into a churning river. It's full of air. It would just bob on the surface and wash away immediately.
Exactly.
He needed something with the dense, sinking mass of an actual human skull. That's a problem of morbidly practical physics.
And that is exactly where his tactical genius pivots into culinary invention. Zhuge Liang realized he needed physical decoys that possessed the weight, the volume, and the organic substance of a severed head.
Decoys.
Yeah. He ordered his army's cooks to take their rations of flour and water and engineer massive leavened dough spheres.
But dough alone isn't heavy enough to mimic a skull.
Right. So he commanded the cooks to butcher some of the army's livestock, pork, beef, whatever meat they had, and pack the center of these large dough spheres with the dense, heavy animal meat.
Oh, that's brilliant.
The cooks carefully molded and shaped these massive meat-filled dough balls to roughly approximate the size and weight of a human head.
He engineered dummy heads. He used the density of the meat to simulate the weight of the brain and bone, and the leavened dough to mimic the skin, creating an organic object that would sink and move in the water, just like the real thing.
It was a masterclass in psychological and physical deception. Zhuge Liang took these 50 massive, meat-stuffed dough heads, marched down to the edge of the violent river and hurled them into the churning waters as his official offering.
And the dummy heads actually tricked the river gods.
According to the mythology, the deception worked flawlessly. The gods received the heavy, organic, meat-filled offering sinking into the depths. Believing they had received their 50 human lives, the gods were appeased.
Wow.
The violent winds immediately died down, the churning waters smoothed out into glass, and Zhuge entire army safely crossed the river without sacrificing a single human life.
That is amazing.
And those dummy heads, those large, leavened, meat-filled dough balls, became the blueprint for the Baozi.
That is just phenomenal. And I want you, the listener, to really internalize that the next time you interact with this food, because the context changes everything. Every time you order a Baozi, every time you hold that warm, fluffy white bun in your hand for a quick breakfast, you aren't just engaging with an incredibly clever piece of culinary engineering.
No, not at all.
You are quite literally consuming a piece of ancient mythology. You are eating a 2,000-year-old tactical decoy that was invented to outsmart a god and save 50 human lives.
It perfectly illustrates how human necessity drives culinary evolution. What begins as a desperate, morbid deception on a mythical battlefield gets refined over centuries. The dense, heavy dummy head eventually evolves into the porous, yeast-leavened, perfectly balanced comfort food we know today.
Let's bring all of these distinct threads together because the journey of this food is incredibly vast. We started by looking under the hood at the actual thermodynamic chemistry of the dough. We explored how trapping steam within a yeast matrix creates an infinitely expanding crustless sponge, drawing a hard structural line between the unleavened Jiaozi dumpling and the mighty leavened Baozi.
And from there, we examine the mechanical engineering of the fillings, how the porous crumb structure absorbs the rendering fats of a savory pork filling or provides necessary airy contrast to the dense, milled sweetness of pureed red bean paste.
Right.
And we looked at the sheer, deliberate violence of the char siu bao, using chemical leaveners to literally burst the dough open, exposing that perfect sweet and savory combination.
And finally, we followed that bursting, meaty imagery all the way back to the churning river, watching Zhu Ziliang deploy a morbidly practical physics lesson to trick the divine and invent the bun in the process. It's an unbelievable lineage.
It really is.
And honestly, analyzing the fat rendering and dough physics for this long has made me incredibly hungry. Depending on your personal appetite, you might be someone who can casually take down two of those giant fist-sized northern-style Baozi in one sitting. Or maybe you prefer grazing on a steamer basket of 10 smaller, delicate ones. But either way, you are actively participating in a rich historical survival tactic.
It truly is a remarkable intersection of food, physics, and folklore. And as we wrap up our deep dive today, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've just spent our time uncovering how a simple, seemingly mundane steamed bun carries the heavy weight of ancient river gods and battlefield strategy.
Yeah.
So the next time you are rushing through your own city and you grab a quick, convenient snack on the go, whether it's a pretzel from a cart, a hot dog, a morning pastry, or a taco, take a second to look closely at what you are holding. Ask yourself, what forgotten ancient problems, what desperate human solutions, or what bizarre local legends might be secretly baked into the origins of your own favorite morning meal?
You never really know what kind of history you might be taking a bite out of. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.